Zimbabwe cash crisis worse. Talking about Venezuela once again. Systemic important banks. They removed the one factor you do this thing called monetary awareness.
Next recession.
Recession will be
A recession.
We're going to hit a recession.
The date of the next recession.
A U.S.-only recession typically lasts 8 to 10 months, but a lot of things about this particular one have not been typical. So
a crash is coming. Now, whether it's 6 months from now, 12 months, 36 months, no one knows.
I go to bed every night, I dream of another recession. If you know what to do, if you have the right plan to set up, you can make a lot of money from this.
Hey there, hope all is well. Back at you today with some more RT News updates. And as you can tell from today's title, we're going to be talking about the piece of legislation that's working its way through the Senate right now as we speak. And it's the Bank Lobbyist Act being pushed by this senator right here. And so I'm going to share with you why I believe that this current legislation here that will deregulate some of the banks and end the Dodd-Frank Act regulations is designed to be the last push to get you in debt before the credit market freezes up and all hell breaks loose. But before I dive into those articles, I want to encourage you to take the time to click the subscribe button for more RT News updates as well as interviews. And if you have not, I want you to join me on Steam It, where I happen to share a lot of articles that I don't talk about on these type of videos here. And then more importantly, if you're new to RTD, I want to encourage you to visit the RTD University page, where I put together all my prior interviews dealing with monetary matters, banking matters, as well as important having sound money in your possession today. So let's dive into today's articles. So as I mentioned, I have a couple articles I want to share with you. And as always, I'm going to scan through the surface, give you something to think about, but more importantly, take the time for yourself to scroll below and click the links to read for yourself. But before I dive into those articles, I want to give you a little bit of a foundation in the idea that after the Great Recession happened, in a public outcry of not wanting to bail out the banks, the politicians that we put in office decided to come up with some type of legislation called the Dodd-Frank Act, which was actually written and proposed by the banking system of itself and encouraged to be put into law to make the public feel at ease in the fact that in case of another recession, that there was some type of protection that would help the people as opposed to making the government bail out the banks again. But in actuality, if people actually took the time to dive into and read for themselves the Dodd-Frank Act in of itself, it proposed legislation that would allow the banks to actually bail in depositors in case of an emergency or some type of economic downturn. So the fact that now we have politicians that's talking about deregulating banks and removing some of the stipulations on the too big to fail banks let me know that there's something up. And as once again, all legislation for the most part to do with banking is written by the banks. So it's good to say that they are preparing for one last hoorah of trying to inject as much funny money as well as extend as much credit as possible into the system before there's some type of event, which at that point, there'll be no turning back. So as always, I want to dive into these articles here. Take the time to read them for yourself. And more importantly, if you find this informative, please share this with your family and friends so they can become more aware on banking matters, as well as just how this whole economy evolves around politicians allowing the banks to run our country. So let's dive into the very first one. So here we have an article here from News Times, and it says, Democrat Bill Nelson wants to deregulate banks that have given him big money. Next one here is from Alternet, and it says, Dems team up with GOP to weaken bank rules, which critics say may lead to more bailouts and misconduct, i.e. bail-ins. Next one here is from the Wall Street Journal, and this plays into the idea of extending a little bit more credit to those that are in need of loans, such as the students. And it says, banks want a bigger piece of your student loan. Interesting. Next one here is from CNN Politics. It says, why are some Democrats signing on to the Republican bank bill? And the last article here is from Vox, and it says Republicans are about to deregulate banks with Democratic support. So it's not too often that Democrats and Republicans are in agreement upon issues, but for some reason, it seems that they're working quite well on this banking bill. So let's dive into the very first one. So what I'm going to do is lay out a little bit of a foundation with each one of these articles, but more importantly, give you my opinion at the very end on how this is all interrelated in that last push to make sure that you take out a little bit more debt before credit market freezes up and all hell breaks loose. So let's dive into the very first one. So here we have New Times. It says, Democrat Bill Nelson wants to deregulate banks that have given him big money. So no question there as to why he would want to do that. But it says the U.S. and Senate seems close to rolling back many of the banking protections adopted after the 2008 crisis. A bill derisively nicknamed the Bank Lobbyist Act would roll back consumer protection and monitoring rules for some of the biggest banks in America, even making it easier for banks to hide racist mortgage lending discrimination. So, roll back consumer protection. So the whole idea of regulating banks is to make sure it protects you, but they want to roll back some of those regulations so that it will no longer protect you. Scroll down a little bit more. It says, the Congressional Budget Office ominously warned this week the measure could increase the risk of another financial crisis. So here you have the Congressional Budget Office, which is in charge of taking tally of all of our financial matters and reporting it. They're saying that deregulating could cause another financial crisis. Do you think the politicians aren't aware of that? Give you a little bit more. So where there's one Florida firm that so-called Bank Lobbyist Act would help immensely. Says, and that firm also happens to have donated tens of thousands of dollars to Nelson's campaign over the years. Sun Bank Trust, an Atlantic-based chain with a heavy presence in Florida, has donated $32,000 to his 3 Senate campaigns since 2000, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. Open Secrets also notes Nelson has 2 30-year mortgages with SunTrust with a combined value between $750,000 and $1.5 million. So here we have the senator here eagerly looking to push this bill so that he himself can help out some of his friends at the cost of your savings and investments in these banks. So something to keep in mind. Hey there, just want to take a quick minute to interrupt this video to remind you to visit the rethinkingthedollar.com website, where you get a chance to see all of my postings as well as educational resources, and as well as visit the RTD store where I have some free material for you as well as some t-shirts. And if you're interested in being more of a blessing to Rethinking the Dollar, I want to encourage you to visit the RTD donation page where I have a couple links there for you to contribute to this alternative media of work. Other than that, let's get back to the show. Next one here is from Alternate. It says, Dems team up with GOP to weaken bank rules, which critics say may lead to more bailouts and misconduct. So give you an idea what's going on here. It says on Tuesday, 16 Senate Democrats joined 50 Republicans to advance a bill slated to roll back key financial regulations passed in the wake of 2008. It says the bill would exempt 25 of the nation's 40 largest banks from being subject to heightened scrutiny by the Federal Reserve. So pause for a minute. Exempt 25 banks. So in actuality, there's only 7 or 8 or 9 too big to fail banks, but yet they broaden it to 25 to fill in some of that wiggle room so they don't isolate 7 or 8 big banks, which I'm sure this is for. So the idea of making it seem like there's a lot of banks that's going to benefit from this, I don't think so. Next article here is from Wall Street Journal. And so this is all tied into why they want to remove some of the restrictions so that the banking sector, the too big to fail banks more likely, can get into the student loan sector, because here you have a industry that's heavily subsidized by the United States government. And so give you an idea what this article is about here. It says the banking industry main lobbying group, the Consumer Banks Association, is pressing for the government to institute caps on how much individual graduate students and parents of undergraduates can borrow from the government to cover tuition. So there's a banking lobbyist group that's petitioning that the government cuts back on some of their fundings so that they don't get a chance to make all that money, but yet let the banks get involved so they can make some profit off of, as it says, parents and students looking to take out debt. It says at stake and potentially billions of dollars in new business for private lenders, a group dominated by the SML Corp, better known as Sallie Mae, Wells Fargo Corporation, and Discover Financial Services. The U.S. Education Department makes about 90% of student loans annually, a market that totaled $107 billion in new originations in the most recent academic year. So here you have regulation that's going to be implemented to allow the banks to get more involved directly. And so the government is basically saying, hey, we'll dial back, or we will probably dial back, let you ramp it up a little bit, let you indebt these kids and ruin their futures with all this student loan debt. And you can make some of our profits, since we've been doing it for 20 years, 30, 40 years, subsidizing debt through tuition. So interesting there. But yet that's kind of how this is all playing out. Next article. So here we have an article from CNN Politics, and it says a little bit more of the same, but it says, why are some Democrats signing on the Republican bank bill? So here you'll get the CNN perspective as to why that's happening, and it's all watered down to make it seem like, you know, it's going to hurt some people, but yet it could be good for the economy. So if you're interested in reading more for yourself, feel free to do so. Then the very last article here is from Vox. It says Republicans are about to deregulate banks with the Democrat support. So here we have a different perspective, but yet all intertwined in the fact that the Democrats and Republicans are all on board for this last sort of hoorah of indebting more Americans before there's some type of event. So that's what's happening in the news. So I want to take some time to share with you the whole Bank Lobbyist Act. And of course, it's very vague right now. I'm sure no one's actually read the legislation that's being put forth because it's probably, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 pages long. But the whole point is that any regulation or any legislation proposed from the banking system by our politicians is never truly in your favor. And so it's something designed last minute, I believe, by the banks to allow them to take advantage of this tax reform as well as this whole tariff talk right now, to allow them to get involved in this economy a little bit more, to extend a little more credit in the days ahead so that between now and the time the next market downturn happening, they can probably pump billions, if not trillions, into the economy, which will allow them to basically be in charge of all the mortgages and enslave students with the student loan debt, as well as car loans and anything else, to where they will be the primary owners of all this stuff when things hits the fan. So take time to read these articles, but yet the Bank Lobbyist Act, believe me, is not in your favor. And so with that being the case, I would love to hear your thoughts on this matter. Leave me a comment below. And then if also, like I always say, if you find this informative, please share this with your family and friends so they can know the push against them to get them into more debt before everything comes loose at the seams. So other than that, look forward to bringing you more news. Thanks.